Welcome to the Motorsports Country Club of Cincinnati for round number 1 of the Rotax Smash Challenge US Trophy East. My name is Emery Lida. I'm joined by Justin Prince, and we're here to call the action for what will be the first round of warm-ups and then straight into the main events later on the day. And Justin, I mean, it's a cool morning, a little bit of drizzle in the air, different weather from yesterday for sure. So, I mean, what are we looking at coming into this this final day of action here in Cincinnati?
We were just talking about this before going live. Potential of slick conditions because, well, there's the chance of rain in the area. In fact, hearing just before we went live here in Cincinnati that things started to sprinkle in terms of rain. So there's the chance that we might have some rain races today, depending on what happens in the weather in terms of the clouds, especially with some of the rain forecast in the area for today. It's going to be a much different day as a result. Not just that, but also temperature-wise, where it was very hot yesterday. It's not as hot, and in turn, it's also very cloudy because of that chance of weather in the area.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, looking at the times right now in the Junior Max warm-up, which is on track right now, the times are upwards of 10 to 15 seconds off of what we saw at this point yesterday in the 1-minute 10s right now. So that indicates the track is very damp. And you can kind of tell based off of the lines that they're taking, as well as how difficult it is for them to turn in, that it is very clearly slick out there. And I think they're all on slick tires. So this has been a chaotic start to the day, and you can really see just how much the drivers are struggling. So wet weather in the air right now, but still the drivers will gain a little bit by trying to understand these conditions, because it's likely that for the Junior Max drivers, when they come out for their final in about an hour, it is still going to be slick to some degree. Now, how wet will it be? How slick will it be? We'll have to find out a little bit later on with that one. But certainly on slick tires, this track is treacherous right now.
Yeah, that's appearing to be the case, especially since this is a racetrack where grip is kind of paramount for a lot of these sections, right? Especially in Sector 2. And we are starting to really see a lot of these drivers, I think, just keep it careful. You don't want to bend your kart this early in the day because of a slick racetrack or because of the dampness of the air or damp racetrack or anything in those regards, especially with what's at stake here today for the finals here today after some exciting races just a day ago.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing to keep in mind is there's only an hour really to fix your go-kart if you do something wrong in the warm-up. So this is going to be critical to make sure that the junior drivers and pretty much every other driver will be on the racetrack. And I mean, we're seeing the times go down consistently, which indicates the track is drying out pretty quickly, but still, you don't want to make a mistake here that will jeopardize the rest of the day, because you simply don't have time to fix your kart. You don't have time to really analyze it. And I think you can see a wet weather setup there for the 240 of Alex Miller. So he's kind of taking the safe approach, going for the wets, trying his best to just kind of get some laps in. Just in case it rains a bit harder, you have the eye for what will be wet conditions if that happens.
Yeah, and a good portion of the field didn't even bother coming out for final practice here. No surprise with the current conditions to keep it that safe here, because that includes drivers like Jackson Gibson, that includes Caleb Tarter, that includes Jackson Deal, who are amongst the top 3 for the race later on today, that decided, I don't need the final practice right here, essentially up on the board. And again, don't blame them with the conditions. If you don't know what's going to be the conditions, if it's going to be damp, if it's going to rain, if it's going to still be full slicks to where it's back up to 10 seconds in pace, does the data from this practice matter that much in terms of that? A lot of these cases, just trying to get the bugs tuned out, so to speak, before you get going for the race in of itself.
Yeah, there's two kind of mindsets on this. One is you paid for the track time, you might as well use it. I know a lot of people have that sort of mindset. So if it's even remotely raceable, they'll go out and practice just for the fun of it, for the love of the game, so to speak. But if you're in the other camp, which is this is not going to be what we're going to race on, why risk tearing up equipment? Why risk getting in an incident that severely hampers the rest of your weekend then there's not really a whole lot of value coming out to this warm-up. So I think it's a mixed grid. I noticed the MPG boys all did not go out for their final or for their warm-up. So clearly opting to save things for the final, not risk any sort of equipment damage. And of course, again, that's kind of the philosophical difference between teams, philosophical difference between drivers. And ultimately, I think it will continue to play out this way where some drivers just don't really see the value in coming out in these sorts of conditions. Again, Xander Malatesta ends up on top of the session with a lap time of a 102.792. So that gets within about 5.5 seconds of what we saw from this group yesterday, which is still a good ways off. But again, here's a look at the schedule. So starting out with warm-up at 9 a.m., which is already past. We're doing the warm-ups now, and then getting into the finals later on in less than an hour. So very quick turnaround from our regular coverage of the warm-ups to the KC Premium coverage of the finals, which will be in less than an hour. So should be a good amount of finals, or a good set of finals today. So looking forward to showing that in less than an hour. And again, this format really forces you to be on the money between warm-up and finals because you don't get a lot of time to change over. And when we change over, the drivers certainly are going to have to change over pretty quick, especially in Junior Max, where you now basically did not get a representative warm-up.
Yeah, and better yet, you're going to have to be able to adapt to the changing conditions here today pretty drastically, depending on what happens up with those clouds above the racetrack here today. You're going to have to be ready to pivot pretty quickly. So it's going to be an interesting time to see what each of these teams do here and what each of these drivers do. You already see just above the camera that just little sprinkles keep coming back and forth throughout the air and the area right now, as it looks like Masters Max is on the racetrack.
Yeah, Masters Max on the racetrack. And again, yesterday, the story of this class was the battle between John Manano and Laurencio Martin. I think Martin had the measured pace, did not have a chance really to make a move on Bonanno. Took one stab at it towards the end of the race, and it did not quite come off well for him. So, again, those two have been pretty equal on pace all weekend long, and I expect that we'll see something similar heading into today where we get into the finals later on.
And today, I'm curious about if Martin is able to get the run on Bonanno in particular, because remember, it all really started from Bonanno having the better consistency from the second heat, kept the track position for the pre-final yesterday, and Martin was able to keep up basically for the entire run. Now, again, long run pace is so critical in this class. If you want to get the job done, if you want to get the victory. So I think for a lot of these teams here, that's why you're seeing a lot of them say, we are absolutely going to take this track time just in case here. Get a feel of these karts, get them ready to go, especially with Martin with the issues he had during his second heat yesterday.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think Martin as well knows that ultimately with the way that he had to adjust the adjust the radiator a good bit, it was likely an engine temperature issue. And in cooler conditions, that's not as much of an issue. I mean, at this level with these good drivers, you'll probably know how to tune it or how to tune the carburetor to get a better jetting for this type of condition. And so, I mean, the engine will be still at an optimal temperature, but the risk of natural overheating just from the sheer temperature outside is a bit lower. So I think that Martin in his case will have felt pretty confident that, hey, maybe we just missed the jetting in that second heat, or maybe the heat of the outside air in addition to a mistake on the carburation led to that sort of thing. So as we get into the race today and we see kind of how it all plays out, I would not be surprised if Martin's pretty confident that he can put it to Bonanno as he has come out on the racetrack right behind Bonanno in this warm-up. So both of them getting a mano-a-mano type of comparison between the two.
Yeah, and curious where they end up going in terms of the race of itself here today. It all really dictates by the clouds, I know that part, but also at this point, this is also an interesting one to give a little bit of a read because of how much you're seeing him try and chase Bonanno, put himself in the situation to see what can he do during the race itself to close up the time and close up the deficit needed. He isn't showing up for some reason on the track. I think he might have a transponder issue there, but outside of that, He's just trying to stay lined up astern, trying to match up the pace for the rear world scenario.
Yeah, this is something I think Mardan probably thought of before the session. What's the point in going out by myself in these conditions where we're 3-4 seconds, well, probably 2 to 3 seconds off the pace, when I can follow Bonanno and get a really good read on my direct competitor? And so this is a smart idea by him. It kind of gives him a rabbit to chase as well, which helps kind of the psychological game. And I think that in this case, we're seeing Mardan really kind of hone in on Bonanno. And of course, the transponder not on, not the greatest thing in the world. It's an official session. I'm pretty sure you're supposed to have your transponder on at all times. Maybe it just isn't working, but either way, Mardan certainly has the pace, even if it's not showing up on the timing sheet.
Yeah, that's something that I think at the very least, or at the least from yesterday, was just a warning, just to make sure the battery levels are right. That's part of the checks, right? You want to make sure the battery levels are correct because you don't want to go to the final, then go hit the racetrack and realize, oh, my transponder's out of battery, and you don't find out until the race is over.
Yeah, you do not want to have a dead transponder in the final. I mean, a lot of series will be kind of lenient with that just because it happens from time to time, and also understanding that, like, in a race situation, it doesn't really matter what lap time you do. It's a positional thing. But you don't want to be the guy that's on the bad side of the officials and risk a disqualification because your transponder wasn't working. So I think that this makes sense on Mardan's part. Just, again, this is why you run warm-up. This is why you check for any sort of gremlins. Of course, we don't know if it's intentional or not, whether or not he intentionally left off the transponder. But either way, good for him to check it out, just to be on the safe end. That's another thing that you'll now know for the final to check for sure.
Yeah, some of the others that I'm curious about what the pace is going to be like is for drivers like Banach, because Bonanno's up 7/10 for him right now in this session. Bonanno seems to be the only one really pushing at full tempo. Everyone else is just still playing it careful about in the 1 minute bracket so far on this racetrack. So at this point, at the very least, you can definitely say Bonanno's trying to definitely treat this like the real world race. Bonanno needs to pick up pace in terms of the race today because he ended up driving on his own in the third spot for most of the past couple races. It looks like, at the very least, though, that it's going to be Mardan who peels on in. He's already seen enough.
Yeah, and also Banaka's, I mean, again, 7/10 is a monster difference. Even if you're second on the session and third when you count Mardan, I mean, it's a lot to make up in these sorts of classes. And again, I mean, I think the conditions make it to where it's a little bit more spread out in terms of times because some drivers are able to find the confidence a lot easier in these conditions than others. And there's kind of more off-throttle time, more sliding going on, so there's going to be more variance in each individual corner, more time to gain and lose. So that might kind of explain why the time difference is so huge, but nonetheless, I mean, 7/10 and seeing it visually on track, him just getting passed and gapped, not ideal for him, and I think that Banach is going to have a lot of work to do if he wants to be able to keep up with Laurencio Mardan and John Bonanno in this final.
And it's looking like the rain's starting to pelt down a little bit more in a steady stream, so to speak. If you look closely on the cameras, that's why everyone's coming in before the session even comes to a close here, it looks like. The rain clouds are opening up a little bit, and that means a little bit more slicker conditions out there. You see the little steady streams if you look closely through the treetops.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, the lap times seem to fall off about half a second on that last session, or on the last couple laps of the session. So we had seen constant track improvement every single session between the mini max, or excuse me, between the junior max and the masters max. Now though, with mini max and micro max on the track, it seems like the track's maybe going a bit the other way, a little bit on the other direction, and it's unfortunate for those guys as they're going to be on in just a minute or so. But yeah, I mean, it's still a lot to think about here because the track is definitely, even if it gets completely dry, it's still going to be different than what they raced at the end of yesterday just because of the sheer temperature difference, almost 20 degrees more difference in the track temp as well with it being cloudy. And I mean, that will change the setup. It will change a little bit of how you drive in terms of your braking zones. And again, I think the karts or the drivers and the karts are going to have to do a lot when it comes to picking it up, especially if it stays kind of halfway damp like this. And again, only 40 minutes left before the finals. You can see on your screen with the warm up and the main events coming up here at 10 o'clock. So this is going to be really interesting to watch play out because normally you wouldn't really sweat it too much with warm up coming up and with the finals maybe being later on in the day. But in this case, the finals are so much of a quick turnaround for warm up that if the track gets much worse than this, you might as well go out if you're in mini or senior max, just so you have it kind of in the back of your head as a reference point. So yeah, I definitely think that the track conditions, how they change, is going to play a huge role in what we see in terms of how many people come out here in the next two sessions.
We did see the session here fully come to a close. Bo Amato was the only driver who stayed out an additional lap, by the way, compared to everyone else, then took the checker flag. But Otto and Banach were the only ones with the transponders on, at least, that were able to get past the 1 minute bracket. It's others like Martin and Todd didn't record official times to the board. So now, in terms of what we're talking about, though, for the mini and micro, that's going to be one where, remember, the draft is so pivotal in that series. It's going to be much more difficult to make a move, you would have to think, even with the draft, because, you're not going to have as much grip to make the passes stick. Here's the track map for good reference right now. Depending on what happens here, usually the draft picks up by turn 1. You have an opportunity. Most passing chances have been through turn 4, through turn 7, usually turn 11 if you're brave, if you get a good enough run from 9, 10, 11. Or, better yet, to the inside of 12 where you can freight train somebody who gets shuffled through 12 up to 13 before you get to turn 14. Not as easy to make that stick here, in theory.
Yeah, and I think, it's sort of a trade-off because what you lose in terms of the ability to make it stick, the lack of grip, the lack of confidence, you gain in terms of people taking it more conservatively. I think if you're defending offline, you're not going to be able to break quite as deep as you would in a full dry scenario. And even if it is fully dry, you're not going to have quite as much grip and confidence under braking. And so on the flip side as well, more offline time, more opportunities there to pass in this sort of condition. So it's kind of a trade-off. You don't get as many regular overtaking opportunities because of the lack of grip, but it also generates some that otherwise might not be possible. A section like 9, 10 into 11 might have more of a chance to make an overtake depending on how slick it is, just because drivers are having to get out of the throttle more. There's more of a variance in terms of how you take those corners, and it might open up an extra passing chance. So it's definitely kind of a mixed bag, but certainly something to keep an eye on as we get into the finals here in just a little bit.
Looks like the karts have hit the racetrack, though, and you can tell that a lot of them are just tiptoeing around, making sure of things before they go full son or anything along those lines. A lot of them are starting to even miss some of the apex lines a little bit, even with the lower speeds, because of how this racetrack's really forming up. Just trying to get a feel, it looks like, at least, to see, can we get the arc down? Can we get the kart to stick fully once we get to conditions as the Red Army all works together here?
Yeah, this is definitely very trying times. And again, we did not see anyone on the track in the last couple of minutes, which would indicate the track is a bit more damp out there. You can see a little bit of the streams a few minutes ago on the camera. You can see the glare on the light, which would indicate that the track is a little bit more shiny, a little bit more slick through turn 4. So again, the track may be changing ever so much these last few minutes, and these drivers are not going to have any idea how much grip is on there until they get a lap or two in and get the tires warm.
Yeah, yesterday, by the way, had some interesting moments, by the way, for the pre-final, where it ended up being the jump start we talked about for Farella. You had 10 seconds for driving in a manner incapable of general safety for Kotelski, because he had 5 complete looks over the shoulder before jerking the wheel in one of those moments we talked about. And then he had Leipka, who picked up a false start penalty after post-race review. So St. Cyr Pierre ended up picking up the win essentially in the mini final. That's going to be prime track position for the 197 in about an hour or so for this class here today and for this group.
Yeah, the pole sitter yesterday in qualifying, he's now going to be on pole for the main event. Kind of in a little bit unusual circumstances, it must be said. I mean, he's definitely had the pace all weekend long. Kind of struggled a bit on the opening couple laps on just about every race, but he's definitely got the pace. Ashton Woon on your screen right now is a guy that is definitely going to be one to watch here. He struggled for pace all weekend long. You saw him there going around the micro entry of Slate Harrell, but the two of them, Woon in particular, has been just lacking a bit of pace, little bit, I would say, throughout the entire weekend, and it's added up throughout the pre-final or throughout the heat in the pre-final with the Red Army working together. So Woon, again, so many wins this year. Of course, swept the weekend this past week at the Scusa Spring Nationals on this exact racetrack. So he knows how to drive, but a Rotax Mini, a different engine package, one that he's brand new to. So again, kind of a little bit of gremlins here, but Woon certainly, you can never count him out at a race like this.
Yeah, he's looked pretty solid in all the races so far. It's just he gets shuffled back at one moment. It ends up putting him behind, so to speak, behind the 8-ball, and in turn puts him back into the line. A lot of drivers getting slippy through the grass there in the practice, though. There was a couple different drivers for the Red Army getting off there from the Burrell Art Machines. But I was about to say, he's got the pace, he's got the racecraft, he just needs the luck and the race position to be able to fully capitalize on it for today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we have no doubts about the pace that Ashton Woon has, but ultimately, at the end of the day, when you have a race like this, if you're not fully on it, it is going to be tough. Because look at all the sliding. This is crazy here in Minimax. You can see there goes Lucas Varela, or Renko Varela, excuse me, off the track. There's the 144 Connor Leifka is off as well. He's stuck in the grass, and with wet grass, you are not getting out of that. More drivers spinning and sliding here. And again, that's Jack Katowski, of course, the younger brother of Nico Katowski. He's stuck in the grass. So slick conditions. We had already seen the lap times go down, and it just seems like the rain continues to intensify a little bit more here in Cincinnati. As there's another cart off. I think that's Lucas Tarango off on the exit of turn number 1.
And that's interesting because Jack Katowski appeared to have the treads on the tires. Correct me if I'm wrong, that would be the rain tires in that case, correct?
Yes. Yes, that'd be the rain tires.
So you're even having with rain tires, some of these drivers making these mistakes. That's going to open up a lot of eyes on what I was talking about for getting the cart to stick in the corners. Well, we're seeing the true test of where drivers are feeling the limitations here today.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it is tough to stick, and even on the rain tires, you're still not feeling ultra comfortable. As you see again, just how slick that bull corner is. Nico Katowski making a move there on Holden Myers. Or excuse me, that's St. Kier on the 197. Katowski's just a little bit up the road on St. Kier. But yeah, Holden Myers struggling a little bit. And again, Jeremy St. Kier had so much pace in the dry. We're seeing now it is a completely different racetrack. What you learned in the dry conditions is basically irrelevant to running fast here. So yeah, I mean, these Minimax drivers doing an awesome job, most of them keeping it on the track, keeping it relatively quick, and just continuing to gather data, even if it's not going to be too representative. If I was a mechanic on the fence line, I would be very tempted to just tell my driver, hey, let's come in here. On slicks, we're not going to gain too much. On wets, we might be able to. But yeah, I mean, this is very challenging stuff for pretty much the entire field.
And this could really shake up the entire running order for how the race finishes in amongst itself, because some drivers are better in rain. Some people are better in dry conditions. Some adapt to both. And we're already seeing a lot of these drivers are trying to break in the same spot as it was in the dry. Like you've seen Varela right there just about go straight through one of the sections, for example. This is going to be where the best driver today in each of these races is the one who is able to adapt the most to everything around them on the racetrack. If you aren't able to adapt to these conditions, it's going to be where you'll see a lot of field shakeup as a result.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, this is where you're going to see again, like I mentioned earlier, the variability in this sort of was, Ashton Woons dropped it on the exit of turn 15 there. But the variability in these sorts of conditions where you get really into the slick conditions, a lot of differential in the braking zones, that will make or lose time. The time spreads are going to be a lot more in this sort of condition, as will be the passing opportunities, simply because drivers don't have the feel for it that they normally would in the dry. And you see there a driver as good as Ashton Woon with as much experience as he has at this point in the cadet platform, still just over driving it for what the conditions would allow, because it's changing every single lap. You can see the rain coming down on the camera. It gets worse and worse. And I mean, you're adapting to a sliding scale at this point. Every lap you're having to do something different, as there's Nico Katowski in the grass. So that's over half of your grid, I believe, that is spun at some form or another on this session.
I think that's Katowski's second spin here, too, with this situation. So, looks like just going to get a little bit of a push to get him out from the mud as they get ready to close out the session as the checker flag waves. This is going to be a wild day for racing now, to say the very least. A lot more different approach, especially in Sector 3 with the conditions. These mechanics going to have a lot to talk about as another spin.
Yeah, there goes Woon spinning again on that one. So, again, Katowski spun, Woon spun, Varela spun, even Lucas Tarango spun, and Tarango ends up on top of the session by virtue of what he did earlier in the session. But, I mean, these guys are running 8 to 10 seconds off the pace of what they ran earlier on in the session, and another 9 seconds off of what they ran earlier in the weekend. So, I mean, this is 14 to 15 seconds off the pace for these guys at this point, running high 115s. As there goes Jack Katowski with a spin. He was second in micro, I believe, to Slate Harrell in the number 8 machine. So again, this is going to be a mixed up grid, mixed up conditions, and a lot of drivers really struggling with this one as Katowski goes around again.
Yeah, at this point too, remember, depending on how things go, the rain tires also can end up, while they help you with the rainy conditions, also can heat up pretty quickly. At this point, I think that the younger Katowski has burned up the rear tires, or at least heated them up a little bit. Hence why he's sliding so much, even in the months, getting back to the gears when getting through some of these slides, and why he just spun again.
Yeah, and it's also just kind of understanding the power. And again, in micro and mini, as a young driver, it's one of the things you might struggle a bit with, is just being able to put your foot to the floor a little bit more gradually, giving a little bit of a weight to get on the power until you're absolutely certain that there's grip on the surface, because otherwise your tires will spin and you will ultimately spin out with the lack of traction. And I think, again, throttle modulation, something that a lot of these kids haven't really had to learn too much in the younger series. So I think it's just something, it's all part of the development. And you can see there Jack Katowski just getting a little bit over ambitious in a couple of the corners. But I mean, hey, like I mentioned, there's a lot of drivers that struggle with these conditions. Katowski was no exception. Even on the rain tires, it is treacherous out there. And again, I think as we get set to go for Senior Max, the final category of warm-ups, this track still is not conclusive in the slightest. As of now, I'd say let's go on rain tires or just not go out at all. But like with the amount of changes on the track from session to session, it is going to be basically a lottery to try to figure out what to do heading into the final.
Yeah, and just a few minutes to be able to get a breather between that and the next session here for Senior Max. Overall today, though, it's going to be, if you aren't able to adapt, it's going to be a long day. If you don't have the throttle control down, as you said with throttle modulation, it's going to be a long day. If you aren't ready for what's going to be rain clouds all over potentially here today, well, we hope you have your umbrella ready on the racetrack.
Yeah, absolutely. And so, again, waiting for the finals in 25 minutes, but we got one more warm-up session yet to come here today. It's the Senior Max that will be taking the track for their one and only session before their final, coming up next here on Kart Chaser.
This is Henry. Henry feels sad. Henry feels sad because it's time for his next big race and his go-kart is in bits. Henry doesn't know that Acceleration Kart Racing is the United States' #1 shop for all of your karting equipment needs. Henry also doesn't know that Acceleration Kart Racing can deliver anything from tires to race suits and even wheels directly to your front door or to the racetrack itself, quickly and efficiently, with tech support available 6 days a week. Poor Henry doesn't even know that Acceleration Kart Racing offers free shipping to mainland USA on selected product if you spend $200 or more. Do yourself a favor. Go to accelerationkarting.com and make sure that you are never left stuck on the pre-grid with Henry. Be smart and don't be like Henry.
Are you looking for an advantage in your competition? Well, KartPlex has done the hard work for you. We've traveled to your racetracks to give you the inside knowledge. So what does KartPlex offer? We've got drone footage that captures the racing lines, visual markers for your braking points, acceleration zones, and the best overtake opportunities on your racetrack. Pedal cam to show you where to brake and when to accelerate, and 360-degree footage to make sure you don't miss any parts on the racetrack. We've covered 13 racetracks in the United States, and Australia, you're up next. So visit kartplex.com to get your track information.
Are you ready to get behind the wheel? From Formula One to NASCAR and IndyCar, all the pros start here. For more information, check us out online at mcckarting.com or call us and go racing today.
Back again at the Motorsports Country Club of Cincinnati. We've got about 1 more minute before the the Senior Max field goes out for their warm-up. And again, 23 minutes until the final start. It'll start out with Junior Max, which has been one of the most exciting classes of the weekend. Then you go straight to the Masters Max, where we'll see John Bonanno and Mauricio Martin resume their complete chess match that we've seen play out all the way throughout the weekend. Then the Micro and Mini Max drivers that we just saw struggling through the treacherous conditions out here in Cincinnati will take the track next, followed by the conclusion of the day on KC, on Kart Chaser Premium stream. It will be the Senior Max category again. The headline class are about to go out for their warm-up. And Justin, if that last session for the minis was any indication, this is about to be a really, really interesting session to watch.
Yeah, especially since we had drivers spinning around even on the rain tires in this corner you see on screen right now, all the way through turn 12, 13, and 14. This entire complex is going to be extremely difficult today. And keep in mind, this is one of the lower points on the racetrack too. So in theory, things could ramp down the hillside in terms of conditions, in terms of wetness. Now it's just going to be, can you adapt? Again, that's going to be the theme today. Can you adapt to the changing conditions and adapt on the fly?
Yeah, absolutely. And the changing conditions, again, you can see the kart cover on one of the Senior Max karts out there, and you could see as well a lot of the drivers rolling up. They're on a mix of tires. I see the 302 of Ben Hernandez on the rain tires from the looks of it. I think Cooper O'Clair is going on slicks based off of what we can see on the camera. Looks to be no tread on that. We'll see if we can get a better view of the tires on his kart. You can see the 333 of Theo Cucati rolling up to the grid in a second there. It looks like he might be on slicks as well. So mixed strategy here on the grid for the Senior Max guys.
Yeah, and you better make the right choice here too, because if you make the slicks and it starts getting wet during the race in amongst itself, that's going to be a pretty long race for you, because you're basically betting on it goes drier as the race goes on. If it goes wetter, then you don't have those treads to be able to have the water channel on through the tire. If you end up going on the wet tires and it ends up going the drier route, then you end up having bad luck in that regard as well, because it essentially sets things up to where you end up having overcooked tires because the treads just burn into the racetrack, as we've seen in multiple different classes at the car racing level and at the sports car level. It's catch-22. You choose the right way, you look like the smartest person on the racetrack. You go the wrong way, then it's a rough race for you.
Yeah, and there's a look on the grid with two of the guys that I think will be players in this race. Ben Hernandez and Adam Marinko, both of them have been quick throughout this weekend at various points. There's Gavin Bale. If there's anyone that knows this track in a mixed condition, it would be Gavin Bale. Due to the amount of track time, just the sheer kind of exposure to this racetrack being basically his backyard. And, of course, it's been a difficult weekend for the TKG driver with some engine issues, just struggling for pace. But, again, I mean, this track, this mixed condition, if it stays this way for the final, is about to kind of throw up some massive surprises as the drivers start to leave the pits. You can see Bailiff still getting his stuff on. He'll be a little bit late leaving the grid, but that shouldn't be too much of an issue when you still have 8 minutes of warm-up time to dial everything in.
My favorite quote from last week from Bailiff was when he was asked about the familiarity with the racetrack by David Land during last week's racing. He said, "Oh, I've stopped keeping track, but I've ran so many laps that I've lost count," which kind of means you're keeping track. So definitely Bailiff has the experience here because of, obviously, with it being his backyard and living at this facility and whatnot. So it's basically where experience matters to be able to figure out the nuances, especially when it comes to a track like this. Experience is going to be very paramount with these conditions here as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, I mean, even if he hasn't been on the track as much in a single-speed kart lately, Gavin Bailiff's amount of track time he's gotten on this place in so many different platforms, so many different levels of grip, that will pay dividends in this sort of session. And again, we don't know how the final is going to be. The final could be completely dry or it could be completely wet. The weather seems to change every minute in terms of what the forecast is looking like. But still, I mean, this is the type of conditions that would apply to Gavin Bailiff. Another guy that we just saw on screen that might have a good day is Akakuma. He was strong yesterday throughout the day. Ended the day off, I think, with the best pace that he's had. He was able to stay relatively in touch with Ramos and Hodgson. And in these mixed conditions, that extra tenth or two might be what he needs as you see him now navigating through the turn 13 hairpin. He's got Cooper O'Clair right behind in tow. Both of them look to be on the slick tires. So, again, different strategies coming out onto the racetrack here in Senior Max.
Yeah, and we already seen that ZCD was extremely defensive in a lot of circumstances, but also made it work despite all the aggression to do so. At this point, I wouldn't be surprised if CCD is able to turn the wick up just a little bit. There's a lot of pressure, though, to be able to keep up with the man who will start on the pole, Diego Ramos. Ramos lightning fast all throughout the races yesterday. Long run pace, very strong in the first 10, 12 minutes of each of the races. He's going to be extremely difficult to be able to beat in this one. So, how will anyone match up? We'll have to see. We talked about a bit yesterday that the biggest test is going to be by the end of the race in the final couple minutes, who's going to be able to match Ramos's pace? Or better yet, so eclipse it.
Yeah, and we did see some of that development from Oliver Hodgson on the last couple laps of the pre-final. He was able to really charge down Diego Ramos down within a couple of tenths of a second at the end. So there is promising pace to match that PSL machine, the Burrell of Diego Ramos, but it will take a lot of hard work from Hodgson to be able to kind of maybe ignite the tires a little bit early. Of course, he does have the extra time in this race that he didn't have yesterday, which, again, the J3 competition comp kart, a little bit of extra time we've seen him be very quick on the long run, so that might work out in his favor, but certainly Diego has been the main challenger, and he'll be extremely tough to beat over the course of this race.
And Hodgson, I think, is going to have an interesting one, because that was one of the ones I threw the question up yesterday, because he was closing during what was essentially the extra 2 minutes for the pre-final yesterday. You add on an extra 2 minutes to work with on the board, and in theory, you have more opportunities. Already playing around with the engine, it looks like the radiator there to cool things down. But Hodgson, being top of the board in this session at least, is trying to see how much he can get out of this kart before we go racing here today in amongst itself. While Ramos, he's taking the, I'm just going to keep it nice and steady and just make sure there's nothing technical part, it seems, based on the times.
Yeah, I got a chance to look at Ramos's kart there, and it seems like he might be on the rain tires from the last time we looked at it. Yeah, and you can see there, Diego looks like he's on rain tires, so that's going to obviously make it very challenging as the track swung back the other way since the Minimax packs. I mean, we're talking about times now that are only about 2 seconds off of what we've seen them run in the dry. So, again, Diego maybe missed the call a little bit on that one, but I'm not sure he's going to care too much because he's got a lot of pace in the dry, and he knew that it was a gamble. He knew that you're going to end up wrong one way or the other just with the way that this track has evolved. So, will not be surprised if Diego pulls in the pits here as he understands that, hey, there's not really a big point in it. And yeah, indeed, Diego Ramos pulls off knowing that the wet tires was not the right move here, but it'll be okay. It's only warm-up. They don't give out points for warm-up, even if some drivers wish that they did.
Yeah, I was about to say, this is actually, if anything, more informative for him and his team. Pernod, it looks like, went on the same similar strat than being right around the same range on the board here. So that's what warm-up really is, again, right, is informational. You're able to see how your kart's running before the race itself, before you run for the biggest point haul of the day, before you try and win the race that wants itself today. See what you can press out of that kart, just like how CCD just pressed the top time of the session right now, knowing I want to get the top time at least. It's also a confidence thing, too, as you said yesterday.
Yeah, and Oliver Hodgson there dials it in a little bit more from ZCD, but these guys are finding more and more time every lap. The track definitely improving. And again, you don't know what the weather's going to be like when you get to the final, but ultimately, to be out there and running fast times in this condition as a driver, it's a pretty big ego boost, honestly. And even though there's a lot of setup things that come into play, a lot of people will say these adaptable conditions are where you see the biggest difference in drivers. And so for the likes of Oliver Hodgson, Zachary Clemendamel, world-class drivers, for them to raise up to the point, as well as a guy like Cooper O'Clair who's in third and only less than half a second off of his teammate, those will be great confidence boosters heading into the main event here in a little bit.
I agree on that one as we're down to those final 20 seconds here at this point. Interesting enough, drivers like Bale have also kicked up some of the tempo. Kakati's been running around where he's been running the races so far. So it's been pretty informative for those on slicks, I think, to see if you end up getting to where there's not a lot of rain clouds left in terms of the skies, or rather in terms of how the rain's falling. You're going to pick up more and more time as the race goes on, and that's going to kick up the time up pretty significantly by an extra second or two. That seems to be at least the indication. But it's going to be where a lot of people are going to be looking at those weather radars to see which one's the right one. Funnily enough, in terms of the radar side, it's the question of, do you pick the right weather radar app to follow along, if you get what I mean? Because there's some who will say, the one is where green is the good thing. I've heard that saying before from people. Rain, that doesn't work for rain sometimes. There's others who will try and see if there's anything in terms of the radar. Okay, let's get ready for this.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the different apps, when they tell you 5, 6 different things, look, I'm always more of a pessimist when it comes to rain. If it's on the radar, I think it's coming. It doesn't matter if it's 1 out of the 5 or 6 that we see, or if it's 1 out of the 5 or 6 forecasts. I'm gonna prepare for rain, and I like the rain, so it's kind of like, you know what, you see what you're looking for in a sense. So, I think the guys in the tents will definitely be looking at the radar and trying to figure out what the best strategy is for the setup in the final. And of course, you want to be prepared for the rain. Even if it doesn't rain, you still want to have the wet tires mounted, ready to go, so that if a pop-up storm happens, if the track suddenly devolves like we saw in the Minimax practice, you're ready to go for it. But Senior Max warm-up in the books. The end of the session, if you look down the timing list, Oliver Hodgson ahead of Zachary Clemente-Mello, Cooper Auclair in the 3rd spot, Theo Kakati in the 4th spot, and Gavin Bailiff rounding out your top 5. A number of drivers went on the rain tires, did not end up well for them, between Ben Hernandez, Timothy Pernod, and Diego Ramos. So again, that is the final warm-up session, and now we enter a 10-minute short break, and then we'll be back on a different stream for the KC Premium members, the finals exclusively on Kart Chaser as a premium member. Again, that will happen in 10 minutes. There's 4 classes. All of them should be barn burners. So again, the warm-up coverage in the books now. We saw some wet track, some dry track, some fast driving, and some spins, but ultimately it has been a fun morning, and we're excited to get rolling in the finals coverage coming up here on Kart Chaser.
Brandon, why are there all these charges for just over $200 from Acceleration Kart Racing's website?
That's because AKR gives you free shipping on orders of $200 or more within the continental US.
Okay, but I thought you were just getting a pair of gloves. That's what, 70 bucks?
But if I'm getting a new pair of gloves, I might as well get a new pair of shoes to match. And then on top of that, I'll get a neck brace, because with the shipping, it's basically free.
Yeah, I do not think the math checks out on that.
Everything you need, all in one place and shipped to your door for free for orders of $200 or more. Exclusions apply. Spend responsibly. Shop AKR.com.
I'm David Serra, 18-time Australian karting champion, and we're launching KartPlex. KartPlex is an advanced digital training program that suits a driver who's just starting out in the sport, all the way to the driver looking to win a national championship. In this program, you're going to be learning about how to find the ideal racing line and what an apex is, braking and throttle markers, wet weather racing lines, and how to overtake other competitors. We target how to brake in the wet weather, and we look on the mental side of kart racing as well with our mental skills coach. At the completion of this program, you'll be lighting up purple sectors in qualifying, know when to defend on the opening laps, and how to pressure your opposition into mistakes. We teach you the tools to be resilient and how to get in the right frame of mind before a race. We look to complete the whole package by getting a strong mindset, a driving style to suit all conditions, strategizing your race, and getting the last 1% from your team. We'll teach you how to win the final lap of a race, driving the wet like Max Verstappen, and creating the perfect bubble for yourself to mentally be in the zone. To find out more, click the link below.
Are you ready to get behind the wheel? From Formula One to NASCAR and IndyCar, all the pros start here. For more information, check us out online at mcckarting.com or call us and go racing today.
Parallel USA, a top-level performance team with unmatched hospitality, offering a full-service driver development program with year-round testing available in Miami, Florida, and the official North America racing team of Parallel Racing Chassis. Chassis and parts available at ParallelinUSA.com.
Hey guys, it's Dave here from Kart Class. We're at MCC, the Motorsports Country Club of Cincinnati. We're here to show you guys the fastest way to drive this almost 1 mile circuit. It offers both fast sweeping corners, some fast chicanes, and a technical switchback that leads into a long main straight. Let's find out where to brake, where to accelerate, and where the best places to overtake. So let's get stuck into it.